Hey guys, PIEGUYRULZ here, and welcome to the behind the scenes / how it's made video for the every episode of SpongeBob Season 6 reviewed. So this is basically going to take you through the process that I go through in making each one of these seasonal videos. Specifically, this one is going to be for Season 6, but I use roughly the same steps in doing every season. In fact, at this point, I've kind of narrowed it down to like a specific science of each step along the way, now that I have experience doing this, although the process changes a little bit every season, where I learn some things work better and some things don't work. So for this season, the very first step, obviously, is buying the season. I only own seasons 1 through 4 on DVD. Season 5 I bought on iTunes. I think iTunes was a great choice, because not only do I not have to have a DVD on the shelf if I end up not liking Season 6 or something like that, but also it's very easy to reference it as I'm working on iTunes. With the DVDs, it's a little bit of a pain because I gotta turn the DVD player on, I gotta wait through like the menus, I gotta get to the episode and scan through it, and it's kind of a pain. With the iTunes, I just double click on the episode and it plays, and I can quickly scan to what I want. It's very easy for reference purposes. So I have just bought the season, and earlier today I bought the season, and I have just watched the first 12-ish episodes, right up to Sunbleached. This is a little note card that I've been writing things down on. Sometimes I write them on notebook paper, sometimes I just write them digitally, but basically what this is a list of the episodes in order, because on iTunes they're listed in like airing order, they're not listed in production order. So I wrote down a list of the order, and also my first rating for these, as well as what picture my artist is going to draw, because I watched them with her, so she took that down while we were watching. I'm not going to show this because the ratings will change. That's the thing. This is the first step in the process, and when I watch the episodes for the very first time here, and most of these episodes I am watching for the first time ever, although not all of them, what I do basically for this first one is just watch it, and maybe pause it once or twice, but really just kind of watch it, absorb it, maybe think of some notes in the back of my head, maybe take down a note or two, but mostly just kind of absorb the episode, no pun intended, and then give it a base rating. Now these ratings can totally change because they're not, I'm not looking super in depth, and I'm watching a lot of these at a time. So sometimes there'll be an episode that I'm like thinking, well, that wasn't a particularly interesting episode, but was it really bad enough to be called a ScumBob? I don't know. It's kind of, I'm gonna put it down as a meh question mark, and then the next, when I rewatch it, then I'll solidify it a little bit more. So I'm 12 episodes in. I will continue to watch the season. I'll probably take a break and come back to it tomorrow or the next day. 12 episodes is about a quarter of the way through. I try to watch them in big-ish chunks, but I try not to watch too many, because if you watch too many of these episodes in a row, they all start to blend a little bit, and you have a little hard time distinguishing. So I'll see you guys in the next step.
So the next thing I do is I work on the slide layout. Now, I usually do this after I've seen all of the episodes in the season at least once, but sometimes I work on the slide layout a little bit before watching the episodes or between episodes or whatever. You might be a little bit confused as to what you're actually seeing here, as this is not something that made it into the final slide. I decided to show this just to show you how much work and how much redesign goes into working on the slide layout, because the slide layout, really, it's one of the most important things, because I'm making these videos that are ridiculously long, and the slide layout is what you're going to be staring at for most of the time, so I want to make sure it looks good. I don't want there to be anything bad or weird about it. So right here you see a fist, and if you know SpongeBob, you recognize that is the fist from the top of the chum bucket. Now, I figured that would make a good header, but the problem is it doesn't fit the right dimensions, and you can see me here, I try to kind of squish it a little bit. I try to pull it out because I need something really long to be the header, because some of these titles are pretty long, but no matter what I try here, it doesn't work. So I tweak it around, and eventually I just decide to scrap it. So here I will quickly go over the process of how I do the art in these videos. I tell my artist what picture I would like her to draw, and I send her an actual reference picture. There's a website that has a bunch of SpongeBob still images images from like all the episodes that I use to just send a picture to her through Dropbox for reference purposes. She draws the picture in pencil and then inks it with a marker and erases all of the pencil lines. And here's where currently I would scan the picture in with my scanner, but at the time of the season 6 video, I didn't have a scanner, so I just took a picture of the physical picture she drew and then imported that into Photoshop. Let me warn you right now, I am no expert in Photoshop, but basically what I do is I take those pictures and I get rid of all of the fuzz and static that comes when you scan in or take a picture of a drawn picture, and I make sure that the lines in that are actually black. Before recording this, I made that bucket out of just using the simple shape tool and playing around with that and deleting certain things. I am a terrible artist, but I know how to manipulate shapes enough to create some basic stuff in Photoshop. I originally had her draw the buckets as well, but because this was going to be on every single slide, I wanted to make sure it looked really good and that all the buckets looked exactly the same as each other and make it all uniform and nice, so that's why I did the bucket myself. And you see here that I took her drawing and I just put it behind the bucket and I resized it and reshaped it to make sure it all fit in there. And that's basically the process I do for all of the art that I do. I tell my artist what she needs to draw, she draws it, I scan it in, I erase all the bits that need to be erased, I clean it up, and then of course I add the color. And then I spend a lot of time in Photoshop resizing things and just tweaking things a little bit so that they are the correct size that I need them to be. And you can see here that I actually have some of the other chum food that Plankton made on another layer here. Basically, I do that so that I can use it as reference. And I was using that as a reference here because the outlines that my artist drew were just a little bit too thick the way they came out. So I have to go in and thin them a little bit so it matches all the other art in the video. Now that I have made up all of the art assets that need to be made for the slides, I have to make sure I arrange them in the right way so it all looks aesthetically pleasing and so that everything lines up and nothing looks asymmetric or weird. This can also take a very long time, but it's important I do this up front because this slide right here that I'm making is the template for all the other slides. If I screw this up or if I forget to make a change here and then later on after making all the slides decide, you know, I think the header should be a little bit more to the left, I have to go into every single slide and move that thing over to the left, and that has happened on pretty much every single season except for season 6. I think season 6 I really nailed it and I didn't have to go back and redo it. I'm doing this here in PowerPoint, but since the season 7 video I decided to just do this all in Photoshop. The reason I used PowerPoint was just because it was easy to arrange all the pictures, but now that things have gotten more complicated with more text boxes and more images and just more stuff, it's a lot easier to just use Photoshop for that as well. Now you can see a difference here in the telescope in this video from the actual finished slide, and that's because after I had worked on the telescope for a little while, I realized that I wasn't quite happy with the way it looked, and so I wanted to go in and physically basically redraw the telescope so that the lines were going to be perfectly straight. My artist does this in a hand-drawn way, and it's a lot easier for me to go in after the fact and just make straight lines in Photoshop. So you can see here I'm basically just redrawing the telescope, and it just looks a little bit more on the professional and cleaner side. And then of course, don't forget that I don't have to do just the pictures for the slide layout, but there's a picture for every episode, and in fact, for the SpongeBob episodes, there's 2 pictures. But yeah, you can see me here working on the splinter. Even in the more simple pictures, I still do a lot of tweaking to things like the outline and little things like doing a gradient on SpongeBob's thumb there. The Photoshop aspect of all this does take quite a bit of time, but on the upside, because it's not editing audio or video that has audio, I'm able to listen to YouTube videos and other things in the background while I'm working. So even though it is a time-consuming process, it's one that does go by relatively quickly because I can still do what I like doing in the background. And let's not forget that I have to do a separate slide layout for each special. And the next step is that I watch every episode a second time. And as I'm going through and watching them, I write down the highlight, the fun fact, which I may have to look up if I can't really come up with anything off the top of my head, as well as things like the episode synopsis. I also think a little bit more about the ratings that I initially gave them in the first watch through, and I will also change some of the ratings, but remember, the ratings aren't finalized until I give my third rewatch, which is also the next step. I watch the episodes for a third time, stopping after every episode to record the audio for that episode's review. Although I do script some of my videos these days, the SpongeBob seasons I do not. I look at the notes that I took down from previous watchings, and I watch the episode again so that everything is fresh in my memory, and then immediately after I just record it, and the recording session pretty much goes like this.
You're gonna hear me just kind of get out all of my thoughts here. And in the editing process, I really kind of narrow it all down. So I might say things here that get cut out. I might say things here that are like totally off base. Don't take what I'm saying right now as to be my pure opinion, because this is my script. I don't write scripts. I just voice. And then basically in the editing process, my audio editing, it's basically like editing a script. I take out the parts that, I think about it and I'm like, wait, I don't really mean that. That's I didn't phrase that right or whatever. The goal here is to just kind of get out every single thought I would have, so that in the editing process I cut things down, because it's more of a pain to add thoughts that I have later on, or to add something I didn't say, than it is to just cut something out that was stupid. Episode 112B, Choir Boys. SpongeBob follows Squidward to choir practice. ScumBob, ScumBob, ScumBob! I really hate this episode, guys. So much about this bothered me. And then I hit the pause, because that was just kind of my first statement. Now I gotta think about what I'm gonna continue to say here. Yeah, this one is gonna be a little heated here. And you'll notice I make gestures and I move my head and stuff, because that's what you do. I'm acting, basically. I mean, this is my real emotion, but I'm playing it up. I'm feeling it out as I would if I was talking to someone. I don't know if I was, but as I would if I was acting. This is what voice actors do. This is what I do. I don't do it intentionally. It's just you make these gestures and mannerisms as you're talking here. Where do I even start with this one? Well, I have an idea. How about we start with the stupid throat-clearing gag? This gag happens a few times in this episode, and it basically amounts to that for like a minute. It is Family Guy levels of overly long gag. It's the type of thing where they expect it to go on so long that you actually find it funny, but you don't ever actually find it funny. It is one of the most obnoxious running gags. Like, if it happened once, it'd be annoying, but the fact that it happens 3 times is just infuriating. That's the entire thing with this episode, is that SpongeBob wants to sing a song for Squidward, and Squidward is too busy being on his way to a choir recital because he's on his way to a choir practice. And I don't think Squidward was even being overly mean here. I think Squid totally has a right to not want to listen to SpongeBob's annoying song. The whole thing plays out like Tom and Jerry. It plays out like cat and mouse, except for the fact that, see, this episode kind of plays out like a Looney Tunes cartoon, where a character is trying to do something and the other character constantly foils him. If this had been Bugs Bunny torturing Yosemite Sam with his singing, that's funny, mostly because Yosemite Sam wants to kill Bugs Bunny. Squidward just wants to get to his choir recital. Squidward just wants to get to choir practice. This type of plot just doesn't work if Squidward doesn't do something so horrible to deserve being stalked. Not that anyone deserves to be stalked, but you know what I mean, it's a cartoon. There's other annoying things too, like there's other obnoxious things too, like Squidward's arm after he gets stung is really grotesquely pimpled, and there's a big pulsating vein over all of the pimples. Ugh. And there's some really weird implied symbolism that SpongeBob is some kind of sponge Jesus here. This whole thing is just so unfunny, and SpongeBob's character feels just utterly destroyed. He's not naive, he's not ignorant, he's not just a well-meaning idiot. He is just intentionally harming people to serve his own purposes. He's evil in this episode. And worse than that, he just feels like a total creator's pet at this point. He just feels like a writer's favorite at this point. It just feels like they write his character so that he is perfect and can do no harm, and has basically transformed into Sponge Jesus at this episode. Meanwhile, Squidward is apparently the devil who deserves to be tortured for every little move he makes. This episode is not funny in the least, and is just anti-humor. It's a horrible plot that really horribly destroys SpongeBob's character, and I have a burning hatred for this episode.
So after recording everything, at this point I have a finalized opinion on what each rating is going to be. I take each slide and duplicate it, and then put on whichever rating it got. If it had ScumBob, I also use a Scum frame, which is something that I make in Photoshop at one point or another in the process. And then with that, the only thing left in terms of the slides is the post slides. Basically, I use the pie chart tool in PowerPoint to make whatever charts I need for this, as well as thinking for a bit on what my top 5 and bottom 5 for the seasons are going to be. While I'm doing this, I typically also work on editing the audio. Now, I have to edit every single audio track for every single episode, as well as any introduction, as well as the outro. What does editing the audio entail? First of all, I get rid of all the breaths that I take, because nobody wants to hear me gasping into the microphone, although I do leave some in if it sounds natural in the way that I'm speaking, or I just kind of make a mistake and forget to edit one out, which does happen sometimes. I also delete some statements that I made while recording. See, the way I edit the audio is the way a lot of people edit scripts, in that when I'm recording the audio, I say a lot of things, even some things that I'm not entirely sure about, I go ahead and say them anyway, and then while I'm editing, I make the creative decision, well, you know what, this sentence doesn't really make sense, or this isn't really how I feel about the episode, or just doesn't flow with everything else I'm saying, or needs to be cut for time. As well as using an effect called male vocal enhancement, which basically just deepens my voice a little bit and makes it sound a little bit more close to how it sounds in real life outside of a recording. I normalize the volume of all of these tracks to a certain number, that way you don't have one episode review that sounds a lot louder than the other one. There is a lot of audio to sift through. For every minute that makes it on screen, there's at least another 2 or 3 minutes that gets cut out. And as you can imagine, in these 1 to 2 hour long videos, that's a lot of audio, and it does take a long time. So another thing that I do somewhere in the process, I make the Scum slide transition in Adobe After Effects. Now I know next to nothing about this program, and basically the way I make these ScumBob transitions is by just messing around with the program for a very long time. And I typically use stuff like CC Particle World and a lot of these generation tools within After Effects. I'm not going to dwell on this because I don't really know much about it, and I don't even really remember exactly how I made this effect. It just mostly was me playing around with the effects editor for a long time. Then comes the actual editing process, which is actually not as difficult as you might imagine. I bring all the audio in, I bring all the slides in, and I bring all of the extra little bits in. All I do is line up the slides. First comes 101A and the first version of that slide, that is the version without the rating on it, and then I line that up to where in the audio I say the rating, and then I put in the second version of the slide that has the rating on it. That starts from the point where I say the rating, and that ends where I start the next episode. I also put on the bang sound effect, which is different depending on which rating the episode gets. I also put in all the stuff that comes before the first episode review and all the stuff that comes after the last episode review. There's a ton of little things I do here, and I really don't have time to go into all of them, but just so you know, there's other little bits and bobs that I put in there. Then I add the transitions to everything. Most of the episodes use the push transition, which basically just pushes in the next slide, but for the transitions between the before the rating and after the rating slide, there's either going to be no transition at all, or there's going to be the ScumBob transition that I place over it. So then I watch it through and I basically add all of the little things that I need to add, stuff like the Squidward Squilliam counter, and I'll put up other little visual cues if I come up with any ideas. Then the last thing I have to do, once everything else is done, is put on the PIEGUYRULZ, and this can take a very long time. The way I do it is I put down one long image, and then I listen to the whole thing and cut that image every time there is a break in my sentence where I'm going to want to change the emotion of the PIEGUYRULZ. Then I have to go through it again and add each PIEGUYRULZ to the little trimmed image there. So first of all, I have to watch it twice, first to cut it up and then to actually add the emotion. And then don't forget that I have to think of which emotion I'm going to use for every single sentence, and I also have to find it amongst the pool of a ton of them. It's not that hard, but it takes a very long time, and at this point in the process, I've listened to this video so many times between thinking about it, editing the audio, and editing the video. I've heard my opinions enough times that I am thoroughly sick of my voice and sick of everything that I have to say. But somehow I muddle through, and then I watch the video like 2 or 3 more times to check it for errors or anything else that should be added. Then I export the video, which basically just means it's rendering it all down into a video file for you. And this process can take a while, but luckily my computer's pretty good, so it doesn't take a very long time, just a few hours. Then I upload the video and I put the description in, the title in, all that sort of good stuff, and I have to put in any annotations that have to go on things, especially in the intro and the ending of these videos. Then I get this video out to the Patreon people who donated to see the video a day early, and finally, after that, I have to put in all the ad breaks in the video. In the case of season 7, actually, some of my Patreon people were able to point out a few mistakes I made in the video, and luckily I had just enough time to go back in the video, edit the mistakes that were made. It was just simple spelling errors and one slide that was in the wrong place, basically. And then I had to upload the whole thing again, and then do the description and the title and the annotations again. But then, at long last, the video is public to the entire world, and it's finally over. And I apologize that I wasn't able to describe exactly how I do everything or go into details about Photoshop or editing or anything like that. But honestly, the process is a very long one, and I couldn't really explain every single thing and still have this video be, well, shorter than the average SpongeBob season review. But I hope what you did get to see was enjoyable, and I hope you do get some understanding of how I make these videos and why it takes such a gosh darn long time. Thank you to my wonderful Patreon people who donated enough to make this video possible, and thank you to everyone for making the every episode of SpongeBob Reviewed series popular enough that it warrants doing a weird behind the scenes video about. PIEGUYRULZ, out.